Drawing trees. So this series, I'm really hoping we get to test our mark making. I will be saying this over and over and over. What is it about? Mark making. We're going to make little pencil marks, charcoal marks, ink marks on papers. And we could test different types of papers, but it's always going to come down to how many marks and what quality of marks can I put down to create these beautiful subjects of trees. It will deal a little bit with what we want to look into to transfer the image, to capture the image of a tree. And also I just mentioned format. What type of format do you feel comfortable working with? Now, this all depends on patience and pace that you want to work with. If you're a little bit faster, you may want to work a little bit larger. My recommended size would be anywhere from 16 to 20 as your biggest, could be a handful. I'm going to be working with, we have it here, some Bristol paper for the most part. And this one happens to be 9 by 12. So 9 by 12, 11 by 14, it's just a little more comfortable than the 8 by 10. Now, the smaller you get, the harder it is for you to put down some of that detail. So as you can see here, I have my pencils, and I do have a range of 2H, 4H, HB, 2B, 4B, all the way up to 6B, 8B, whatever level of contrast you want to create. But for this type of work, I also recommend, and I myself, using lots of, and you see here I have just 3, but I have more. The 3 that I probably will be using a lot, mechanical pencils with the leads, as you can see here, of 2H, HB, and 2B, which gives me just enough, more than enough really, range of contrast in value and the sharpness of the lead to create that ultra fine detail. Erasers, we have your kneaded eraser. I have this small drawing tool really, because you will be drawing light back into your drawing with this mono eraser. And then your regular just PVC acrylic, PVC Faber-Castell erasers. So whatever feels more comfortable. This first session is going to be pencil, graphite. And I wanted to show you just really quick a couple of samples. So what we have on screen is a German artist by the name of Victor Müller, 1800s. And I want to actually zoom into some of these. Now, is this something that we're going to try to go for here? The quality of this image on screen. I have a detail of it. So when you see the entire subject, you see there's what I read most is very fine pencil lines. It is a larger drawing. This is a little larger than 8 by 10. It might be a 9 by 12. And what I see most is contrast. I want to really emphasize that as long as we're making good marks, the quality of our marks, and we're talking about the gesture, the pace, the speed, the direction of marks, we also want to pay attention to the value and the darkness and lightness of those marks and how they're working together to create the volume of the trees we want to make. And that is the trick, basically, working with light and shadow. That's the first thing that stands out. You could literally see the time of day, and you could see the position of the sunlight coming down on this tree. If we get a little closer, this is the same image. This is the tree. This is a close-up of that image. Notice the looseness. You could actually tell the speed and the direction and the shift in pressure and the level of detail, what I always call detail. Just think of it as mark making that this artist was thinking about. And I did choose these samples as the best way to show you hopefully what our goal for today, which is to capture this looseness combination of parallel hash marks. In a way, they're broken, they're layered, they're horizontal, vertical, zigzag, almost script-like, type of marks. There's some scumbling, and I will go over all of these. Most of you know them already. But also, same artist, different look. Going for a little more finished touch here with blending the graphite and then layering pencil over it. So this is going to be just to show you two samples from the same artist of how you can begin to push graphite into the direction and the quality, which in the end is going to be about how much detail I want to add to my trees. So let's start with one quick exercise. And for that, I'm going to go to just sketching paper. So let me go back out here to our first image. And I also, well, just to show you really quick, Bristol paper, highly recommended. There's all different kinds of qualities of drawing paper. Thickness is crucial. Very thin and fibrous paper may give you a different and a little more challenging, but maybe a better feel. I'm using something that is really smooth and almost velvety, really, for the actual graphite that I plan to lay down. But this is a mixed media. It holds watercolor, as heavy as watercolor. It's also used for printmaking. Lots of artists use it for color pencil, but it does have a little more cotton fiber feel. So as you work on the surface, you may feel like there's a little cotton lifting off from your graphite, depending on how you treat the paper. Here we have more of a plasticky feel. So I'm going to choose Bristol for most of this series, but we will obviously work with, the plan is to go from graphite, pencil, into week 2, which we'll use charcoal. So we'll look at maybe Bristol or different type of charcoal papers, pastel papers. Week 3, we're going to try to work our mark making with ink. So we'll be doing some ink trees. And then for week 4, we will be working with a mixed media, sort of revisiting, and maybe even some watercolor. Hopefully we can actually get to that far. So it'll be a progression of mark making, including at the end maybe some color into your drawing. So what I want to do here really, really quick is I'm going to grab my pencil, and I'm going to go with my HB pencil here. And what I want to show you basically is shapes of trees off the top of my mind without even using a reference. As a child, I could just go with a circle, and there's a tree. We could literally simplify it down to basic shapes. Now, here's a concept that I'm wanting to get across, and it's going to be a big one for this series. No matter the shape, let me go with another one here. Off the top of my mind, go with something like this. There's my trunk. Can I simplify it even further? Well, yeah, it'd be hard to, unless I make it more stick figure. As long as I begin to add detail, it's a matter of choice. How many marks and how many more marks do I go into? How many more marks does it need in order to be finished? And that is going to be the way you work yourself all the way through. Okay, it's done. But there's always going to be somewhere you could keep working on. So it's going to be a matter of awareness and choice of, does it need more marks? How many marks is it going to need? And what is the choice, the best choice of mark that is going to get us there in the most efficient way? So we have these trees, very simple. I want to bring in the concept of two-dimensionality. So these trees are just height, width. What I want to bring in is, if you go back to 7th grade, I guess, you have your X, Y, and then we're going to bring in the Z dimension, the three-dimensionality of a tree. So if this is not making sense, we're looking basically at what becomes a circle, turning it into a sphere. So we're creating the illusion, and that's only going to be done through light, through creating the volume, the three-dimensionality of how wide, in this case, or the depth of the tree, as we would see it, The illusion comes only through adding lights and shadow. And the biggest thing here is going to be how you manage the value of each individual mark, but at the same time, how you're managing the contours of those basic shapes. So this one here, thinking of, we could apply this to any type of art, obviously. If I were to say, instead of trees, portraits, we could go from just your average, let's say a face where I have a nose, and see I'm already adding light here, where we could have what becomes a face. Once I begin to think in the terms of three-dimensionality, and I'm hoping this comes across, we need to think of the depth of the cube. And what makes that happen easiest is how light is going to affect that and create the illusion. So when we bring this over to trees, I want you to look at the sample. Notice that you could see which branch is closest to you and the trick that we use for that, which becomes contrast of lighter or darker, and also the contrast of sharper marks versus blurred. And we're talking about any type of mark, whether it's a sharp, and we saw this zigzagging, versus a blurred. And the combination of these, as we place them together, is going to give us that illusion of three-dimensionality. Okay, so just basic revisiting of forms of trees. We're not going to get too much into the biology or the science of it. We're going to get right into the drawing. And the first selection is going to be this one. So I'm going to my paper. Now, some of these drawings, if you have your sketchbook, it would be great for you to work in your sketchbook. I'm going to recommend, if you're working on paper like I am, sometimes you may want to consider, if we're going to work, let me show you this artist again, without the background, where we could look just at the bottom, place it on the ground, and have just some touches where the star is going to be your tree, your subject, main subject. But if you are considering any type of background, to probably work with a masking tape, create a frame, which would make this a standalone piece, because you are going to put a lot of work into it. And the last thing I want to mention, I included two projects in the email, which are this small, call it generic tree simplest shape that I could find. And we also have this one here. So depending on your pace and how you feel you can work, if you finish this one too fast, there's another one for you to probably pick up on. I'm going to try to take this one as far as we can. And for that, I'm going to start with, as I mentioned, I want to start with pencils. And the reason why is I want to be using the side of my pencil, not the fine line. So I'm going to be starting with, and I need my 2H pencil here. There we go. And obviously a sharp tip. So one of the things I want to show you first is this, the techniques. If I'm drawing this tree, my absolute biggest tip, recommendation, blurring it. Blurring and simplifying, from biggest to smallest, from simplest to more complex, from lightest to darkest. That's what we're doing today. What is the biggest, simplest shape that I see? If you blur, you not just begin to see the overall shape, simplest shape, which almost, it's not necessarily a circle. I see more of a little bit of a square-ish on the sides and even at the bottom. So here I just want to make sure I capture somewhat of a composition in terms of the size on my paper. Do I need to make it lower? Do I want more sky? Am I going to include a lot of the ground here? So all of these composition decisions that we need to make at this point are going to be based on this first impression, where I'm going, as you can see, more for a square with somewhat of a rounded top. Hopefully you could see that. Really, really committing to the simplest, biggest, simplest shape that I could see. Now, as you can see here as well, I'm going to work in a horizon. So I'm going to begin to look a little bit at negative space, the space between the bottom of my tree and what would be my horizon. And how I decide to bring this in. Do I need to go all the way to the edge? Thinking about the strategy. As I work along and as I get further and further, it will get darker. How am I going to work with this area? Am I going to be working every little blade of grass? Am I going to blend it in and erase some light back into it? That's part of the process that we're thinking through right now. So this would be step one. As you blur, and we always need to come back to this one. I highly, highly recommend taking a blurred view of your subject. I don't want to say every 5 minutes, but every time you're making a big decision. So squinting through your eyelashes as hard as you can. And what that does is you really want to map out. Most of what you're looking for here is the light map, the shadows. And you're going to be, again, we're at the biggest, simplest shape. Obviously, these shapes don't become simple. So in this case, I'm kind of adding just some lines to where I see the biggest areas. And I only see this by really, really squinting. And I begin to see, oh, wow, look, there's two kind of twin triangular shapes here that round out. And there's one here at the edge that kind of spreads up. So making a mental, but really understanding the form without going too far and without confusing yourself later on. Because at this point, I could begin to make marks that are going to really begin to create that illusion of depth, of light and shadow. But I don't want to go that far yet. I want to set myself up. And I really want to begin to allow myself to read more and more into the detail. So this is one. And most of you do have seen this before, the blur, which I highly recommend. And all you do is just squint your eyes right through your eyelashes, or close one eye and squint, which also flattens the image. So the next one I have is, most of you are familiar with this too, the notan. Now this is the training it takes for you to see this in real life, even when you go outside and draw a tree from life, to be able to see this. Because what we're trying to capture in pencil, in graphite, literally it's this, what you see on screen. If we get anywhere near the matching of the light and shadow, meaning the density in the mass of graphite, where you're going to darken, no matter what type of mark you make, if you get anywhere near the contrast of this light shadow, you are going to have an excellent drawing. And that's a guarantee. So this is one way. So how do we see this when we look at this? Well, I'm going to do it a few times because it's just really getting used to it. And once you see it like this, and then you understand it in just the simple terms of light shadow, you are way ahead of the pack. And you can actually begin to see, when you focus on just one simple area, that, oh my God, yeah, all the answers are there. They're revealed. So this is one really, really good one that you're definitely going to want to study and definitely really walk away saying, I understand what I'm looking at and what I want to, when I need to go to an area, how to solve the problem. And then finally, I always include a black and white, because whatever's missing here, and that mostly would be the midtones, the grays, is revealed here. And in this case, we have such a great photo, great lighting, that it is pretty much not even the the midtones. The shadows stay very dark, although we have breaks of grace in those shadows. What I see mostly is shifts right around the light and closer to the highlights, where they become a little brighter in the notan, meaning this one. So just to take our drawing even one step further, we would refer to this one, to the black and white. And for the most part, I would start here. And just as well, blurring what you see here. So squinting my eyes at this image is going to really get me a little sharper in terms of edges and beginning to draw some of the mapping, in this case, of the biggest areas of dark. So I am going to have a second camera here to show you lots of the mark making that I'm going to be starting to do right now. And that would be with this one here. So hopefully you could see right here. And it is somewhat going back and forth. I'm going to my sketch paper here. I don't want to, it's what I was using earlier. Whether you are hatching, looking for short or long marks of hatches, whether you're looking for more of a scumbly type of line. Notice what I'm doing here. The reason I said I was going to use pencil, I could go from thick and dark to ultra fine, hair thin, and also thick light to ultra thin dark. When you see something like this and you begin to compile all of these and just compound the variation of all of these mark makings. I mean, I look at this and I already have kind of a tree trunk going right here. So what exactly am I looking at? Almost always I'm looking at contrast between light, shadow. Is there any shadow in the thing that I'm trying to draw here? Not the detail. I don't want to draw every single little leaf, every single little, when I look at a trunk and every little break, I'm looking as for biggest, simplest, and then further into more and more complex, smaller and smaller, shifts in contrast. And that is what you want to read. So one of the biggest tips that I want to show you here in close-up is when I begin, and I just started what seems like the outline of my tree trunk, I want to stay away from just kind of lollipopping like the first tree I did, the outline of it. I want to work in and out. And this is going to be kind of in the quadrant. If I decided to start with the tree, with the bottom of this tree trunk here, I want to be able to, if I can, zoom in or look closer and have some sense of reveal. And it is simple, where the decision in my mark making here, and for this type of detail here, I am getting a little too small. This is where I would shift over to a mechanical pencil. And I'm going to do that because I do want a higher quality. So all of this, what I'm saying, try not to just outline the edges. Work the edges in. And allow yourself to really read whether you're vertical, horizontal, diagonal. Is it a pattern of scumbling and hatching? Is it stippling? Is it just, call it chicken scratch? I'm working with the 2H here. And always note that in just one area, I don't have to work the entire drawing. You're going to develop your own system, whether you go from lighter to darker. And let me put this example, just when we have portraits, if you have a student that starts at the eyes and finishes the eyes in order to get the rest going, that's fine. So I'm going to work here my tree trunk, and before I move on to working all of the area in a 2H before I move up to HB or 2B, it's fine in order for you to see what the contrast of some of these values is going to be from pencil to pencil, to just work in smaller areas, as long as you can keep track of how you're planning your way through. So as you move along, I'm really just taking a look at the sample I have on my iPad where I zoomed in, and I'm mostly looking at, it's somewhat of a stippling, but with dashes. It's not dots like you see here. It's more of dash, small little lines, almost a parallel hatch, but it has more of a feeling of stippling with small tiny little lines. And the thing I'm looking for the most is levels of saturation, where I need to be light, preserve some of those lights, and where I need to darken. Now, one more thing, and I'll go back to that paper to show you a sample. If I have this here, and I said not to do this, the outline, but this, let's just make it a cylinder. And I do that by adding a curve here at the bottom. Now I want you to, obviously we will have a horizon here, we won't see that. How do we make a cylinder look like a cylinder without, just with pure lines? So if I'm not adding value changes, meaning if I'm not going to blend the graphite and usually do the thing where it gets a little shadier on the side and then it comes forward to the light and I have that value change, which immediately creates the illusion of, oh look, it's rounding. The other way would be to, here it is again, to actually make your marks in the rounding as if you were literally putting them on the surface of your volume. So notice that a tree becomes a tree, and the thickness, it's not straight flat lines just to create saturation. Although we did see our artist Victor Mueller do that and be successful at it. What he did was create what seemed like cross hatches that were horizontal with just a touch of diagonals. And that is how he begins to create that curvature. For us, it must be easier. It will be easier to just follow the roundness. And this roundness that you see here on the tree trunk, it applies to all of your subject. So when I'm, let's say here at a little higher on the tree and the leaves, as I simplify my shape, I want to have the sensation of, is it rounding forward? So my lines would follow that direction. Or is it rounding back and away? And here is where I was talking about earlier, where it gets sharper and darker, and as it goes away, it may get softer and blurrier. But the direction of those lines, or scumble, is going to also reveal and enhance the illusion of the full form. And you can begin to see it here. Now, this is not to say that you cannot get away with just using parallel hatches all the way through, and by manipulating the diagonals in your hatches, you'll be able to create the same illusions. That will take a little extra engineering, and it is the way most artists, masters, end up going with, because it is somewhat the fastest way. And if I show you once more that detail, there it is. You see how there's a tiny little curvature to his lines right at the edge, revealing almost as if your hand touches the trunk. You get that feel of roundness. And on top of that, you obviously get the sense of where the light is coming from. So notice the combination of curving, hatching, patterns, parallel hatches with a somewhat just filling in of graphite. So he's actually, what I did with my 2H, which was just cover some of those darker areas, preserving a little bit of the whites, and then coming over with some of that parallel hatch to reveal that tree trunk and give it that characteristic, that very unique characteristic that we're looking for. So I continue here. Now, in our method of drawing, I'm going back to my 2H. And here it would be fine to go back to pencil because I do want some of that richness sometimes of a little bit of the tilt of the tree trunk. When we're dealing with tree trunks, thickness and height are going to be crucial. So notice here, if you really, really see it, how thick in relationship to the overall size of the tree is your trunk. And in terms of height, long or short, it's going to be probably the biggest characteristic that will make it a strong drawing if you get the proportions of that right. So it would be like drawing a person and making them 2-3 feet taller or shorter. It would affect the likeness. So here you want to pay attention to that. How am I going to deal with this grass for now? I'm using my, in this case, HB pencil. I'm jumping up a little bit, and I'm just going to create a somewhat of a scumble. It's going to be really hard to describe the type of mark. Most of my marks are going to be almost zigzags, mixes of crosshatch, wanting to be stippling almost because I do lift at sometimes to open up light. Sometimes that just continuous line that zigzags but scumbles. And in most cases, my favorite, it feels like I was almost writing a letter, but very, very tiny letters. And you could almost see the letters S and U's and N's. But if you want to simplify that even further, all you have to think about is value, number one. How dark does this line need to be? Systematically, you would bring in how long or short. So the size of your line, the thickness of your line, and then the direction of your line. So the direction meaning more vertical, more horizontal, or which type of diagonal. As I combine that with the value, the quality, the technique, that's what makes our line a chicken scratch, a scumble, a stippling, a crosshatch, you name it. And you'll realize you'll find yourself going to a favorite one. Now, I should point this out. It should be a very, very meditative experience where unfortunately my voice probably will be just distracting you from that. When you get a chance to do this in quiet, somehow you find yourself really connecting, going deeper and deeper into every single mark, where each pencil mark has an identity almost. And you will remember it. So it doesn't become automatic, mechanical. Even though you're working your way through patience and pace, like I say, like everything in life, it takes love. Loving the moment that you're in right now. Not wanting to rush through it. And enjoying it. Making it really, really as much fun as possible. It's somewhat of a workout too for your fingers and your wrist. So make sure you shake your hand every, let's say, 3-5 minutes. Pay attention to your knuckles. If you're putting too much pressure on your pencil, remind yourself to grab it longer and lighter. And play with different. It doesn't have to get so dark so fast. Don't forget to squint. Don't forget to ask yourself a question. Okay, what am I going for here? Am I just filling up an area? What is the goal? What is the light shadow shape? What is the direction of my line? What is going to be the best quality of line, combination of lines to describe that? So here we are. I'm working that tree trunk into the grass. And I decided to go maybe with just a little bit of a shadow under the tree. But notice, this could take a while, and you could be here for an hour just working this area here. So I decided on somewhat of a shape of scumble. You could literally write things. So it's more like a script, scumble, linear in a way, because it's mostly following this horizontal pattern. And I'm trying to do variations of saturation. So darker areas where I see them, and I'm still looking at the notan, and breaking the line almost like it was a stippling. Giving each little blade of grass a little bit of character, but I'm not trying to draw every single little blade of grass. I'm drawing kind of bunches. And you could go a little bit wider on your pencil, thicker here like we did earlier, and just let it roll. And this is one I really love. So I'm going to go back here and show you. When I begin moving away from the grass and I'm going into the shapes, which are all in shadow at the bottom of my tree. So here, I absolutely go for blind drawing. It absolutely works. And I hope you could see this. I'm going to grab my pencil. I just have my thumb and my index finger, and I use my traditional grip, overhand grip here, to hold it. But what I want to do is, I want you to do this. Notice the writing on my pencil. Can you see it right there? Look what I'm doing to it. I can spin it 360 degrees. So I'm not just making a mark that goes left, right. As I draw a line here, for example, I'm looking at the bottom of the tree and I'm looking at the silhouette coming out. So I'm beginning to shape what seems like tree leaves, the leaves at the bottom, in the back, obviously. These are not in the front. And as I blind contour the shapes of this and leave openings, I want to make sure I combine scumble. This is pretty much a continuous line, so I'm not lifting the pencil. I want to really, really pay attention to the pressure I put on the pencil as I draw these lines. You do not want them to be all one quality. You want to have lighter. So I'm going to switch over here so you could see. It's funny, people make fun of me too because my pinky goes up like really soft. And it's, you could grab the pencil really long and try to do that. So as you, and there is no, you're not going to make a mistake here. The more your line breaks, and look how soft it gets. You can barely see it, but I could show you closer. So the pressure on the pencil, the pressure on the line, how close you because I want to get a little more detail in these edges, I grab it a little shorter, but it's still the same grip. It still is the same grip. And the biggest thing I'm doing here is as I follow the scumble and my blind drawing, meaning I'm not looking at my paper more than I'm looking at my reference. I'm looking at my reference, and I really want to get a sense of proportion. So I do check back in so I don't go too wide or too big. But notice that as I draw my line, you see my fingers rotating the pencil. So I'm throwing the line by putting specific amounts of pressure, somewhat thinking about the direction as I blind draw with a continuous line, but the characteristics of this line are coming from rotating the pencil. So it's a rotating scumble, let's call it that. And now I want to see how far out I want to take this. Can I take it all the way to the edge? Should I? I want to make sure I have the good shaping. And there's going to be edges of branches with lots of little leaves coming out. So what I said earlier about not outlining, when you have a shape like this, You absolutely want to do that. And I'm going to take it to the other side. And test out different pencils. If you're still working with 2H, move up to a HB. Maybe go ahead and jump up to a 2B. As this obviously is going to be darker, you could skip a step. You could be wasting some time because you will be working over it. If you're working with the 2H, you're going to have to work over. So it's work that may get lost. So strategizing for that as well. Since it's going to be darker, I may move up to a darker pencil. And I just want this basic outline at the bottom. Notice the quality of that line. There it is. And it is very playful. And I always like to point out, it's kind of childlike. That's what you're going for. But it's a very aware, artistically aware, sensitive quality of line, because you really are giving every little edge, every little leaf its due. And there it is. Now really, really rotating much better on my right side than my left. That's something to be aware of as well. And you can see it here in the quality. How this one rounded just a little bit better. And one of the biggest things when we draw trees is the ease which we can make up information. Because we could just start throwing lines here and who's going to know? Hey, that leaf doesn't go there. That one's way off. So we could do that. So trying to stay committed to what you see. And notice here, I'm going kind of in layers over this line in order to darken my shadow area with that same quality of line. And here's where that patience comes in. How am I going to fill this up? Do I want lots of light breaking through? Which is another thing you're going to notice with trees. When you have breaks where you see across the branches to the other side and you have sky coming through, managing those open areas and the edges of those open areas is going to be very, very important. So as we revisit fundamentals of art with very simple pencil lines, biggest to smallest, simplest to more complex, lightest to darkest, we also want to bring in the key of what we're working with today, which is contrast. Contrast of value, contrast of line, contrast of size, contrast of thickness, contrast of quality. Did I say contrast of sharpness and blurriness? So all these different types of contrast that you can create. Are there any more? I'm sure there are. And there's many, many ways to come up with more contrast. Can you think of one? And see how it would work. So now I'm going for an absolute scumble where I'm mostly focused on the rotation and the direction, but at the same time, trying to get a good read on the overall pattern of the leaves. So are they falling this way or are they kind of falling down and out, rounding from top to bottom? So remember that cylinder, thinking of, in this case, it would be somewhat of a sphere where the leaves come in and out, and there's layers of leaves. So there's leaves that come over leaves that are underneath that are following the same pattern. And if you can capture that with your pencil marks, as you can see here, you begin to see the layering of leaves, one coming on top of the other, that obviously then has to be darker. So what I do here is by using pencil to kind of map out those big areas, I would then come over with a mechanical pencil, which is going to allow me to be more precise with sharpening and a little adding density, saturation to some of those And again, I'm just scumbling. When you scumble, I really, really want you to try very, very hard to do it blind, meaning you are looking at the reference. You're not just scumbling to color in. You're scumbling because you're seeing in your reference areas where there's breaks of light and shadow, where you could see direction, where you could see saturation. And you're really just trying to reproduce that into your drawing. So I mentioned we should be switching back and forth from our notan to the actual image in case you don't want to miss any of that detail. You also want to maybe check every now and then here in your black and white so you could see better midtones. And there's so many little breaks. You could actually cluster up some of these bunches of leaves. And how to deal with some of those midtones from reflected shadow, light on the shadow areas. Well, here's another one. So as I work this area, and I'm going to actually do it on this side here. You saw that I was working with an HB pencil. I'm going to go ahead and map this out here. There's lots of little breaks of light that go all the way through. The ones I was mentioning before, those are going to be crucial for your shadow areas. Remember, we're talking about contrast. So when I have clusters of leaves and I have sky showing through, what you're doing there automatically is showing the volume of your tree. That XYZ that we talked about earlier. What I want to do here is bring this other option. So I'm scumbling my way through edges, mapping what I see as darker with little gaps of light coming through right next to the trunk, little leaves falling off, single, and I don't want to do too many of those. Very saturated area right in here. Now remember, I'm doing all this by just blind drawing and scumbling. There we go. And what I'm going to do is at this point, I'm going to bring in a blender. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just look, and in a way, I'm scumbling. I'm scumbling the same way I was drawing my lines, looking for those openings that I want to leave alone. I want to preserve those lights, meaning the white of the paper. But everything else, I'm going to gray. Now, I could gray it with line. In this case, I'm graying it with graphite just by blending the area. But I don't want this look to be the predominant look. Although it's a beautiful look, you can actually really create a beautiful tree drawing with blending. So as you can see it here, I create a midtone now. And the quality of that midtone, it's going to be up to you. How far do I want to push this? So can you see the difference there? And on that layered midtone of graphite, I could go a little bit back to my 2H. I could do my HB. And now I begin to add more scumbling over it with less density or saturation of graphite and sharper contrasts in the darker areas. So we just added an extra value and a great look of gray that enhances both the whites and the darks, softening a little more the contrast and giving us much more a better visual. And in the end, it's about what makes the illusion more sellable. Are we selling this shadow under the tree, which has this peculiar forms with these type of branches and clusters of leaves. That's what we're going for. And replicating that look, you could see how it becomes much, much richer. There it is. So this is something you can do, once again, in stages. I could do this and work my way all the way around. And I'm going to do that next, trying to come across my edges here. There we go. And just continue working my scumble, because I want to give you this tip. If you manage your contour as you work into the map and really pinpoint those, in this case, I'm really just trying to map out those dark areas, as you can see here, where I could layer and I could define what's underneath and what's falling over. And I'm going to do that in large, again, big to small, simple to complex. And this is a little far from simple, but I try to simplify it as much as I can. And there's going to be variations. Notice that I'm going from scumbling to cross hatching. Why am I doing cross hatching? Because I know that this area, and as I continue just a little further up with the next layer, what I'm going to use it for is to blend. Just in and around the line. Now, my blending, I use a scumbling motion to just create a little rhythm, a little variation to the look of it. It's not just flat rubbing of graphite to make it, to just fill up an area. You want to create more and more points of interest, things that break. And as you can see here, I'm at the point where what we started with. How much line do I need to get to where I need to go, or I want to go? That is the biggest question. How do I achieve? Now, efficiency, great. If I just want to get there quick without too much lines, and that's the reason why, just so I don't have to do that much line, and it's lack of patience. You need to be patient, but knowing that you can achieve great quality, great rendering without having to do maybe as many lines as you are. And that is how you develop your strategy, your style, your approach. And as I said, you, in a way, get lost inside that tree. And I'm going to do a big blind drawing contour line here, going way into the tree in the middle here, capturing more of these shapes. And I'll come up with the strategy as I add some of these shapes, and I don't want to lose my place. I could switch right back over from line to blending, back to line. And this is mostly so I don't lose my place. But talk about a test of patience and focus. It does require you to stay focused and give it that little bit of attention. For a great drawing, you need to invest a little bit of patience, a little bit of focus, and add in a pinch of love. or a lot of love. If you're getting annoyed or just losing patience, to step away, and maybe come back to it later when you're more relaxed, or start a new one that maybe, if we get to the point of frustration. But there is a big thing here when you do drawings like this. You are investing. It's an investment of time, energy, and you have to see it that once you start, in order for you to use your time, focus, patience, materials, mediums, and have that reward, it's you need to have a strategy. It's good to develop the strategy. And is it okay if I just go with it and see where I end up? Of course. But within that, believe it or not, you are somehow making choices, developing. The reason you switch over to an eraser or a pencil, or the reason you're doing the line the way you are, it's because you somehow are strategizing it. Now, the more aware you become of that and then forget about it, that's the trick, which is what they call kind of making it very zen, very meditative, is you have a strategy, but then you don't think about it too much, and you just let it flow. And although it may seem like I'm outlining, like I said not to before, what I am looking for is smaller and smaller shapes. And yes, I am dealing with the edges before I deal with, because I do want to piece it together. And piecing it together, I'm beginning to look at more and more crosshatch here. But I am kind of addicted to this quality of line, which is that script scumble. And I do mix it with all kind of different marks. Notice here again, it goes into that chicken scratch kind of stipple, where it just breaks the pattern. And before it becomes too repetitive, too automatic, too mechanic, I step back 1 second, look at it. How is it working? I like it. Take a good look. And here's where what I would call my finishing touches. In this area at least. So as I started working from one area to another, and I'm reaching the edges here, notice the quality of lines, and you heard the pencil just blind drawing still. So I'm looking at my reference, and I have a sense of where I am. But the type of line goes from scumble, it went to kind of crosshatch, and now I'm just getting a little bit of, if you see the quality, it's broken scumble that almost has this stippling feel, like the way you would stipple. But this one is a little, it's not dots, it's little longer dashes or scumbles, and they are directional. So they're not always going the same way, as you can see here. And they have a little bit of kind of a C curve to it, or sometimes they're like a V or an N. And it all comes from really, really being almost hypnotized, forgetting to blink as I look at my reference, not losing my place. And I'm really, really diving in every single area of this tree, trying to capture just light, shadow, contrast with pencil marks. And it doesn't look like much when you look at it this close, but there's richness. And as you pull back, oh wow, look at that. I begin to see the light effects. So whether you like this, and notice that in some cases I prefer for this type of drawing not doing the blending, but I did want you to see that. Now it does actually work rich when you bring an eraser. So I'm going to do that right now here. I'm going to look. You don't do this just, again, randomly. You look at your reference and you really read the light, squinting, and immediately you see areas where, right here. So I'm, again, using that same method of kind of dash, scumble, rhythmic pattern to bring up, as if I were drawing, not erasing, but drawing areas of white, areas of light back into my drawing. And you could do that by softening some of the grays. So this is a little great eraser for that, because it does have that little sharp point. And it almost, you could touch it on anywhere really to break up not just grays, but lines. Lines that maybe got a little too compact, too saturated. And it really just brings back, just pops more visual interest. So as I get into some of this upper area here, I want to make sure I finish this here, which I see as one of the darkest. It just rounds, and you follow it almost like a river. In terms of shape, it just goes up or down. If you're working, I'm working from bottom up. So here you go into the upper and just follow the shape. And I'm still with an HB, having gone to the 2B. Most of it is scumble, but you begin to see that change, that contrast that we're talking about. And just really, really go for it in terms of quality, mark making. How many other types of marks? Remember, pressure, how you grab your pencil, your tool, number one. Try grabbing it a different way. Direction and the rhythm, the pattern of your lines. Are you kind of cross-hatching? Are you zigzagging? Are you scumbling? This is the perfect opportunity for you to test out something you haven't done before. Now I'm doing more like almost like letter U's. Lots of right here. So I'm moving up into this area here, where I know I need to saturate a little more. And notice that instead of kind of a crosshatch, which would be this motion, and it's a parallel hatch actually, I go into somewhat of a, it's like double U's actually, but I could break it, slow it down into like lots of little letter U's, which is kind of the shape of leaves. And what it does is it bunches them up. So it begins to automatically create the layers. How am I doing this? Once again, blind drawing, looking at the reference and making out the areas that are denser, darker. Just taking a peek every now and then to place my pencil in the proper position. But I gotta say, 95 to 98% of the time, you should be looking at your reference. A great exercise would be to go for 100%. Draw a tree 100% blind drawing. Meaning you never look at your paper. You look at the start, place your pencil down, and then go. Look at the tree. Feel the mark, so you don't have to see it. You know it's going down. And really connect. You got to remember to blink, almost. That's me. Like, oh yeah, that's right. You can blink. And you should blink every now and then. And look, I'm just following it up, kind of like a trail of dark. And I went off the page here, off camera. But I'm following it almost like a river. I mentioned a river before, or a trail that's zigzagging. And it's mostly composed of scumble, letter U's, letter N's. So in quality of direction, but I have a better sense of where all these lights and darks, mostly darks. In this case, I'm looking at darkers. The darker bunches of leaves. And all of it was done 100% blind. Just like that. And so it makes sense, what I said earlier, not to outline it, meaning don't go just all the way around the edge. You should find yourself there. And I'm not saying you can't do that in areas, but just to outline it like we usually do other drawings, silhouetting it, and it takes away a little bit of that live tree feel, which in some ways feels random, but it's very organized. So you need to find a little bit of that. How is it ordered? How is it organized? And how you deal with the edge breaks of subject with space. That's maybe where I would go into a little bit of that contour drawing. But I cannot emphasize it enough that blind drawing for this is your best friend. And you should be forcing yourself more and more towards just feeling the line. And what do I mean by line? Feeling the value of the shapes that you're looking at and describing those with lines, rotating your pencil, feeling the pressure, getting a sense of the quality without having to look at it. And yes, you can peek, but the most important thing is you do not lose your place. You know exactly where you are, and you can come right back to it after you take a peek. But if you're losing your place all of the time, you make it too random. Now, is that a bad thing? Not really. It could work, but as an exercise, what we're looking for here, expressive quality of line, it will flow. It will be much, much easier if you allow it to be free, really. And the less you look at your paper, the more you allow that to happen. Breaking my line again into dash directional marks. As I reach some of these areas that are going to have, again, those midtones, beautiful and very careful areas of light and shadow. So the contrast is a little more, it's not as sharp, but it is defined. You could see it. So understanding how I'm going to add that in, I could go back to blending, maybe. And early on I mentioned having this as a standalone piece, because most likely you will want to frame these. These are going to be so beautiful. And one thing that will happen is at the end, you should feel like you were sketching a tree all the way through. Not drawing, but sketching a tree. Doing a study of a tree. giving it that kind of looseness, that free feel of really playful, expressive line. So I'm beginning to deal more and more with space around the edges, and there are some spaces inside. And that is going to be a crucial part of the volume of our tree. Here's another one. Lewis, this is too easy. I need a challenge. Go left-handed. So you go left-handed, blind drawing, and test that quality of line. If you're using your pencil in the dark areas, the side of your pencil, absolutely okay. It all comes down to you testing and asking a question in order to realize, does this work? Is it working? Is that the quality of line that I want? Now notice the absolute shift when I moved to left-handed here. There's an absolute, the word is sensibility to the line. Some may say, well, no, it's just dexterity. You have no control. But the theory of right brain, left brain, I truly, really, I feel it. It's not like I believe in it or I know it to be true. I feel it when I do that. When I use my left hand, I absolutely engage my right brain. Right brain, we know for a fact, deals with space and is the one that deals with intuition, less language. It shuts down the left brain, which tries to simplify, solve the problem in a more direct, verbal, analytical, logical way, which would make our tree look just like an average tree that we, like anybody remember those, what were they called? The little graphics you put in the Word documents? I forget. But anyways, the quality of this left-handed line is actually what I should be doing and what I would be doing if for the goal, the proposed goal of quality of line. Now, it may alter, shift the whole look that I was working with down here and into here. But for me, this tree becomes something else. It becomes mine when I do this. When I do it this way, you kind of begin to understand, oh, okay, that's why Van Gogh did that stuff that way. And that's why Frida Kahlo did that way. Because they had a connection to a strategy, a way of seeing, and then making it theirs. That's how I make it mine. Which is that one that makes it mine? It comes with a feeling. You feel it and you say, this is it. That's that feeling. That's how did I make that happen? Generally, it has to do with the subject, and who doesn't love trees? But it goes a little bit beyond that. It's your experience of this specific moment with this tree. And I believe you add your life experience, your memories, all of the feelings that you felt all of your life, all of them poured right into here. And that's what humans are capable of doing. And it is a beautiful thing to see. When that happens, when you allow that to happen, you realize, well, all we're looking at is lines. Bunches of little lines put together, but there's something about how these, with this one here, what is it? Some people, it's still a mystery. But I believe there's something about the way energy is flowing as you're doing this, the way you're allowing it. The more childlike, the closer you are. So I jumped from one side to the other just to close out this area here. And yes, did I make adjustment to some of these branches here for composition purposes? So they're not going all the way out of my paper. Is that allowed? Of course. Now, if I were trying to reproduce an illustration of a tree for a botanical, document or something, maybe not. You want to stay and maybe take measurements, do the methodology of how you would actually be precise and proportion and all the other things we do with methods of drawing. Here I'm taking a lot more freedom, but overall, I go to, again, quality of line, sensibility. Now this switching to left-handed really slowed me down, and that is what it's required for this type of quality of line. It cannot go faster. If I go just a bit faster, I will lose the sensibility, the quality, the flow of that line. And how I deal with shadows as I do my left-handed blind drawing becomes really different than what was happening here. And that right brain left brain theory that we know works, you see how much more dominant and rigid and stiff this line is than this more sensitive, more playful, in many ways delicate and expressive. You have that. We all have that in us. And how to turn it on and off, also part of the strategy. And as we see it come together, we started with biggest to smallest, simplest to more complex, and lightest to darkest. So I need to be considering a little bit of darker now, a little bit of smaller, and a little bit of more complex. And it's going to get more complex than this just by saturating areas. So I'm going to switch over very quickly here to a 2B. Just see how that goes. Now with my pencil, or in this case, I have 2B leads in my mechanical pencil. I'm going to continue with left-handed, and I'm just going to go over some of these areas here. So what am I looking for here? I'm looking for that same quality of line. It's a layer on top of the previous layers. And what I'm really looking for, I'm still at the black and white image that we have on screen. So that is my reference. Now notice that I can actually see shadows that are darker. So there's light and shadows within the shadows. And that is what I'm going to try to draw here, or sketch in here. Lots of these breaks, and you could literally see 2 or 3 or 4 shifts in value within the shadows. So it's not all just black. It's not just black, gray, white. There's levels of black and gray all the way to white, which is the space around and through that happen within this area of the tree. And just by adding that little bit, I can see already how it's working. I am going to bring in just a little bit more eraser to my tree trunk. I think now that I see the contrast, I need to bring some of this light that's coming through the leaves, and that is such a beautiful thing to play with and work with. We're going to be doing more of that. The way light bounces, reflects, and washes through, creating these beautiful areas and shadows where light beams in and does all these magical things. So that's what I'm doing here on the tree trunk. Hopefully you can remember before and after. As you see it here, I can immediately see the change. So I'm glad I caught it. So I'm playing with different pressures. I may revisit some of these softer lines on the tree trunk here as it goes up, and I begin to see the shaping of the structure of this tree. And there's a few spots where you'd see direct sunlight on the tree trunk. So you want to bring those right back out. And if you go too far, oops, that went too far, then I will go back to my 2H, my lattice pencil, and I'm going to just softly bring it down by adding, in this case, I'm just hatching, parallel hatching, curved parallel hatching to give that cylindrical feel, the volume of our tree trunk with a little tiny bit of detail. Ooh, but I'm loving it. This is fun. Going back to more shadows here, and that contrast right here. I'm switching over to right-handed. I need a little more control and a little more pressure right down in here where we're going to see huge contrast and that space between the back of the far. We're looking at the back deep dark shadows of the leaves, of branches and leaves that are just on the side of this tree trunk, giving us a little sharp edge, a sharper edge. So I continue to scumble, and there's some beautiful areas here. I'm looking a little closer. I need to bring out more light. That kind of sneaks in right in here, right at the edge of the tree, and then we see leaves layered, falling on top, and we see sky all the way through. So little areas like this become key points of interest. They will catch your eye, mostly because, well, it's contrast, but it also helps solidify that illusion. And I'm going to the darkest dark that I can with this 2B now, right in here. So I'm just saturating. I would call this 90% blind drawing. I don't want to go out of some of these or cover some of these. Light. There's a lot of little breaks. How many of them do I need? Do I need to be at that exact, that specific? Not really. But I do want them to be apart. So if I had to count them, there's 6, 7, 8, 9 of them. How big and small? That is probably more important. There's some bigger ones, smaller ones, and there's little leaves that break right through them as well. And here's what that looks like. So notice how we're beginning to saturate, and that contrast that you could see. It's a little bit of respecting what you did, trusting it, and then leaving it alone. Being able to leave it alone. Move on to the other area. It is tough. You want to keep going. But I mentioned earlier, it is going to be one of the crucial factors. When you make that decision, okay, that's enough. No one else can make that decision for you. So as I started with 2H, added some of that 2B. Now that I'm bringing in this 2B, it is just amazing how it's all combining. And here's that thing where I said you could be wasting your time if you're working too long with a lighter pencil that you then are going to not realize in your strategy kind of just work over with these darker pencils. So you could see for next time, well, I won't do that again because I know that I'm just going to come over with a darker pencil. This 2B is going to cover this whole area. So I don't need to add or stick around with all that type of pencil marking early on with the lighter pencil. And you'll begin to see it somewhat like an engineer. Okay, we have this scaffolding here, so we don't need that much of it. We just need structural for safety, set it up for success, and then you could see the walls, windows, all of it coming together before you even put one thing up. So you need to know what to set up, knowing that later it's going to make it all so much easier. More and more scumbling. It's getting a little more refined, smaller, darker, and in some cases more complex. Just layered scumble over layered scumble. That's what making it more complex. There we are. So here I'm going to be careful because as I add 2B, it is a much softer and it is a lot darker. Now, contrast. Is it just that much darker? The reason it looks darker is also because it's sharper, meaning I'm using a mechanical pencil with darker lead, but because the line is so sharp and dark, it looks that much darker than the previous HB and 2H lead. So I want to be careful not to overdo it. And maybe doing a little bit of squinting again. I'm going to try to break it up. You could get carried away. This is the area where I say, as you get closer and closer to the finish line, you want to be more and more careful, more and more patient, not to rush and kind of cover up, break all of the previous work that took this long to get here. And it could happen very easily. And the reason is sometimes loss of patience, a little break in focus, and also just wanting to finish. So take a little more time. It should feel like, okay, we're getting there. Let me enjoy this final part of my journey and take it all in And I mean, take it all in from beginning. All of that work, now seeing it come together. And going, wow. There it is. So notice how I slowed down. And I do see, I stuck with the 2B. And I'm just mapping out as my dark areas of shadow get smaller and smaller. Doing it mostly blind, mostly just scribble. It's like continuous scumble, scribble, hash, combination of all of them. I mentioned that letter U type zigzag with a little curve to it. That's happening a lot. Now, it doesn't all have to be same pressure, same thickness of line. Remember, you can use the side, shift the pressure, and get lighter 2B lines and thicker, darker, longer, or shorter areas as well. So continuing here with the 2B, layering, mapping, and as I said, being careful not to go too far, be able to make the call when enough is enough. At least for the darks here. I'm going from light to dark. Now I'm going just to map out and guide me a little bit better from dark to light. So I'm looking at, once again, blind drawing, bigger to smaller and smaller and more complex areas of dark. Notice here how I'm just layering. Most of it, again, it's a scumble, kind of just parallel hatch, zigzag motion that I then can go back to my HB. All of this, by the way, blind drawing. And with the lighter touch, begin to blend those shadows, midtones, all the way to light. And some of the lights that I do want to preserve, I'll try to stay away so I don't have to erase too much and keep them actually bright white of the paper. The only way I think this works really is if you truly not lose your place, and not losing your place by really, really looking at your reference photo is the easiest way. And as you move in and out of shadow areas, layers of leaves, knowing and understanding how to push back and pull forward the three-dimensionality of these branches of leaves is going to be the key. And how we go into the last stages as we get more and more specific, beginning to map out not just the shadow now, but the outer edges of some of these clumps of leaves that are the closest to me. So they're going to be the lightest, pulling up at the top, lighter at the bottom, more in mid-tone shadow, but giving us that sense of volume as they fall forward and down. And I'm moving around, again, blind drawing, just looking as I set my pencil, and then mapping out as I look closely to some of these edges, not the specific individual shapes of leaves, but the clumps, the edges as a still big shape of light or shadow here. And you see how slowly the pieces of the puzzle begin to come together. And I repeat it over and over, avoiding to make up information. What do I mean by making up information? Putting stuff down that is not actually there, that you're just kind of just taking shortcuts to fill in an area without really looking at your subject, and therefore taking away the characteristics that are very simple, light shadow shapes that are getting more and more complex as they get smaller and smaller and as they get darker and darker. So notice here with very quick, just piecing together, I could begin to see now really forms within the form. And then I just continue taking this all the way through to the ultimate, very specific, until the time where I call it finito, done. And that is the artist's choice. So obviously we have an extra hour of work to go on to this one, about half an hour to an hour. I recommend as you get close to the finish line, you do slow down and take more closer looks to the smaller details, and then make the right choice of how much of that detail is necessary to finish your drawing. I really hope you enjoyed this one. It was fun. And I will see you next time.